Thanks for staying with us. You're still watching the conversation right here on News Central TV. Now, should the government of a country not be responsible for its citizens? Well, Ugandan President Yoweri Museveni says his government will not intervene in the current economic situation amid a rising cost of living in his country. Prices of petroleum products, imported raw materials and food have been rising in recent months, a crisis being experienced globally following the war in Ukraine. In a televised national address on Sunday night, Mr. Museveni said that government subsidies or removal of import taxes would collapse the economy. He added that there would be no hemorrhage of dollars from the national reserves for the purchase of those expensive products.
Now, President Museveni said Uganda will need to frugally use the import items it can afford. He advised citizens to substitute expensive wheat with locally available food such as millet, maize, green bananas and cassava. But even the prices of locally produced food have been rising, especially in urban areas, driving up the transportation cost. Ugandans are having to buy smaller quantities of basic items or pack their cars to cope with the crisis. Now, joining us this evening for this conversation, we have Ssenyonga, a lawyer from Kampala, Uganda, and Marcella, Karekye, the Senior Special Advisor, Communication and Director, Government Citizen Interaction Center, the State House, also joins in from Kampala, Uganda. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the conversation. It's a pleasure to have you both with us today.
Thank you.
Now, I'd like to start with Simon. What's your reaction to President Museveni's speech to the nation last night in the economic situation in Uganda?
Thank you very much. I think, firstly, the president, as I've stated earlier elsewhere, that he did not say anything new. I think having listened to him critically for a couple of years now, the address was really a regurgitation, so to say, of his previous positions. He continues to highlight the historical background of what the ruling party, the NRM, takes as a political stand. I think he gives us, in regards to the address, he talks about his inspiration from Mao Zedong, who gave 2 lines of political reasoning. One of them was a revolutionary stand, which the NRM government, he said, has taken. Now that is more of a hard stance, no nonsense. Then he regarded that of individuals who come out to challenge the hard stance as one which is reactionary, non-realistic, and populist. So that shows you the line of thought, especially in what he regards as a solution to the economic crisis that we're having right now. Secondly, I think he also restates the position that most of the African political leaders, and I think globally, have been mentioning that the challenge with their nations and the crisis that is happening has been caused by the international war happening between Russia and Ukraine. So it explains the crisis in the escalation in the prices of the different commodities, the failure of the government to prioritize some, the incentivization for the common Ugandan, because the president feels that in regards to taxation, the government will lose a lot of taxes should they try to cushion the economy and incentivize the nationals. I also realized the president continuously making mention of the fact that the opposition was the one which has slowed down, the opposition in Uganda has slowed down the realization of the success of some of the policies that they have taken. So overall, I think there was nothing major, there was nothing new. But I know as we get into the discussion, we shall get to have an objective critique of the entire address.
All right, thank you very much. Now, Marcella, still on the same issue of the president's speech at 8 p.m. Kampala time. Now, everyone was expecting some form of relief plan and had huge expectations. So what solutions the president offered to an anxious population?
Thank you very much. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you.
Again, thank you for hosting me. And I'd like to give a bit of background because we're recovering from COVID and going into, Ukraine and Russia. Now, our government has been has been recommending and actually has put some interventions aside, or some money aside, and injected about 900 billion into the economy, small business enterprises, through the commercial banks. The government has reduced its spending, travel, a few other things they had put on hold during this time so that the economy can recover. Now, what we are calling government's non-reaction or non-responsiveness is actually government taking a very serious economic stand, because right now these are temporary problems of an external nature, which if we take permanent solutions for a country that still depends heavily on imports, trying to move away from that, it is true, we're going to suffer a lot. Our current account will suffer, our reserves will suffer. And who will suffer in the end? It's Ugandans. So I would like to urge us to really take into account the fact that we do have a serious import substitution policy that's coming up. When the president talks about industrialization, increasing our exports, depending on our own raw materials, finding alternatives for wheat, this is not because he's, maybe he takes it lightly. It's because that is probably what will save us in the meantime. There will be externalities. We had 2008, the Great Recession that affected the whole world. So these things will keep coming. But what are we going to do in the long run or in the long term to help us, to cushion us, not just small interventions or short-term interventions, which look small but are big. By the time, if you reduce taxes, for example, now, or remove a tax right now, which, by the way, hasn't changed while the prices have been changing because of external factors, to recover what you will have lost, or to come back and put that tax back because maybe now the economy has recovered, it will be very difficult.
But Marcella, sorry to jump in here. A lot of people are saying that it's the tone of the president. He appears dismissive and not concerned about the plight of ordinary Ugandans, I beg your pardon. He did say that if you can't afford bread, you should go eat cassava. I mean, he's the father of the nation, and you expect him to carry all Ugandans along. It seems like there's a disconnect between the presidency and the ordinary people.
I don't think there is a disconnect. There is that tone. Well, he does sound like he's telling you that, you know what, you do have things available for you. Do not fear. Maybe he said what Ugandans didn't expect, because when somebody tells you, why are you eating bread when there's cassava, and you expected him to say, no, I'm going to remove the tax on bread, perhaps that does sound like he's insensitive. But truthfully, he started by giving hope that we've come through a lot in the past 2 years. And each time we have come through it together, really, as a government. So it's not that he's being dismissive. In the back there, he's trying to support industries that are going the route of using what we have as raw materials and import substitution. But I would not really pay so much attention to the tone, because he's doing the work. He's doing the work behind there. He knows what he's saying. He's saying to you that, do not lose so much hope. These things are available. It's not that if you don't have wheat, or which we import, if you don't have bread, you are going to die. There are so many. Cassava is a very good alternative for flour, and even healthier. So I wouldn't want Ugandans to be sidetracked or to lose hope. He is actually trying. He's doing the work. He's doing the work in the back, trying to support science and research in this issue, and not just telling you to eat cassava. No, not at all.
Okay, let me bring in Simon there, because you're saying that the president now is doing the work. Simon, do you believe in that?
Yeah. I think that's a subjective question, definitely, depending on what work you're talking about. And maybe to put a contextual face to what is happening in Uganda right now. So my sister Marcella talked about the policy, the recovery policy that we have. Now, in Uganda, we have a practice which has been consistent by the government. When I say government, I don't only mean the ruling party. I also mean the opposition, which is part of the parliament, the executive, the judiciary, in whatever regard. So the idea has always been the failure to follow through the strategic plans that are made by the government. Uganda, at least on the African continent, has one of the best policies in regards to planning. We have a whole institution called the National Planning Authority, which designs policies and advises government on strategic moves that needs to be taken. In Uganda, we've had, for example, the National Development Plan 3, Vision 2040, among other very good policies. But there's been a consistent practice of failure to follow those policies. Come COVID-19, 2020, the country takes a very hard stand of adopting blanket measures. And when I say blanket measure, I mean the lockdowns. Because just our neighbors here in Tanzania took a stand which was different and achieved our, what I would call, quote unquote, eternal aspirations. Uganda has aspired to achieve middle income status. It has just become a conversation. But Tanzania, which many have mocked, achieved middle income status in the middle of a pandemic. Now, even countries like Sweden, and yesterday the president took a swipe at Sweden as one of the nations which were careless and insensitive and reactionary in the way they handled the pandemic. But when you look at the stability of the nation and the realization of their aspirations, they were much more protected because of the policy. They refused to take general blanket policies.
Yes.
So in the same lockdown, you have recovery programs that were made. Marcella will tell you that in Uganda, a special social recovery program was made, and it was funded through the Office of the Prime Minister. It was run by the Office of the Prime Minister to help the vulnerable women, the youth, among other people. But the accountability of the resources, the distribution of the resources was very unclear. And then I could make also this other point, that in Uganda, when you read the theme of our budget for 2020, the year of the COVID-19, the theme for that year was the recapitalization of the Ugandan economy. Special resources were allocated from, and special grants and loans were taken from African Development Bank, World Bank, and IMF to recapitalize the Uganda Development Bank, which is a key finance institution in realizing social, economic, and empowerment programs. The resources that had to be used for recapitalization of the Uganda Development Bank were actually misused and given to people who are not vulnerable. The parliament, which has both the opposition and the ruling government, in 2020 November passes a supplementary budget. So in Uganda, there is a practice of failure to align strategic priorities in terms of passing supplementary budgets vis-a-vis how they are going to be financed. So a budget was passed, never accounted for. In 2021, the year where the new parliament comes on board, at the time where the accounting committees of parliament, the oversight committees of parliament had to be operating, the parliament was suspended. Literally, it was the committees were suspended because of the COVID-19. So because of that, there was no sufficient oversight of parliament, which is a key role it has under Article 77, 78, and 79 of the Ugandan Constitution. So
Simon, I don't mean to interrupt, but I would like to bring in Marcella. But before I bring in Marcella, I just want you to say that, are you trying to say that with more fiscal discipline, the government of Uganda could have done better?
That's the point that I'm making.
Okay. Again, because we're running fast, we're fast running out of time, I'd like to bring in Marcella to get her thoughts on this. The Ugandan Central Bank announced that inflation will hit 5.2% in the month of May. Many Ugandans, already squeezed into a precarious economic situation, have looked on helplessly to the government for solutions. The finance minister has promised no intervention, citing that the free market philosophy will tame rising prices. In neighboring East African countries, Kenya and Tanzania, that are also reeling from the effects of this global economic effect, they have made some sort of intervention programs and subsidies. So why is the government of Uganda just leaving everything to free market economy philosophy? Marcella.
Before I answer that question, I would like to answer my brother. The government interventions from 2020, 2021, given COVID, one, the supplementary budget. There is a provision for supplementary budgets, 3% of the overall budget anyway, to cater for emergencies, what you call non-alignment of planning. But if you remember, government cut monies from different ministries, departments, and agencies to cater for COVID, because this was an unforeseen crisis. So now what the supplementary in 2021, people who came back, they came back to see if they could get some money, these ministries, departments, and agencies, to fund what was cut from them, the items that they couldn't fund at the time. So it isn't just indiscipline per se. There was a genuine reason, COVID came. UDB has the funds and is still giving out the funds with a very strict and serious criteria. UDB is really, it's a loan, my brother Simon. So it's not really it's not free money. You have to pay it back. Therefore, so your business, you have to have a business that has been running and that shows that it will be able to pay it back. UDC, which is Uganda Development Corporation, buys shares. This is another thing, but it is an intervention. They are funds. So they'll buy shares in these organizations, hoping that when these entities recover, then they can pull out. So the interventions are there, and then the small, medium enterprises. Regarding this free market economy, like I said, what the danger with interfering now, first of all, is that when these shocks go away, it may be very difficult to go back then to what were our measures, our taxes, our ways of raising finance, and it looks like the government is doing nothing, but it is. For example, fuel. Fuel does take some shocks. If there's anything, if the neighbors are going to an election, we have a problem. Right now, we're working on alternative routes from Tanzania, because Kenya it doesn't seem so predictable. But we are working on an alternative route for fuel to come. We have seriously put aside money for what our projects, our refinery, our pipeline, our people are starting to mine, extract our oil. So I want us to have hope that what we see now will go away, these shocks, these increments. Taxes, the government has not, doesn't seem like it's going to add any more taxes or introduce any taxes, for example, in this new financial year, because the timing is just not right. There's been all these things that are happening to our economy. There's been no increment of taxes, even when prices are increasing. So we cannot reduce taxes so that we reduce the prices. What we'll do is watch what is causing the increase of the prices, these externalities. When President Museveni said he's talking to these people, it's because he knows that if this war, for example, stops, or if there's some concessions are made and sanctions are lifted, there will be a change. Prices of importing containers, freight from China to
all right, Marcella, let's bring in quickly. Now, you talk about the fact of bringing hope. Marcella talked about bringing hope and the fact that he has brought about alternative routes in Uganda. Now, what do you think the government can do to help cushion this high prices on ordinary Ugandans?
I think it's good to have hope. I mean, who wouldn't have loved to have hope? What we're saying here, to use the words of the president, is to be realistic in our approach. So, number one, fiscal discipline is very important. When we say fiscal discipline, it goes just beyond the financial accountability. It goes to the political accountability. In Uganda, we have a law called the Public Finance and Management Act. Section 26 of that law creates what is called the Contingencies Fund. The Contingencies Fund is meant to be a 0.5% allocation of the budget of the previous year. What has been happening right now is that the Contingencies Fund of Uganda has been underfunded. The idea of the Contingencies Fund, it's supposed to be a pool of resources when emergencies break out. But that conversation is something that nobody wants to talk about, especially those, especially the government. So fiscal discipline goes to number one, solid preparation, the Contingencies Fund. Number two, have proper accountability. I have told you that in Uganda, during the COVID-19, when we locked down the country in March 2020, we took loans and grants from African Development Bank, IMF, and World Bank. Majority of these resources were underutilized. And even up till now, the committees in parliament which are meant to follow up on these resources have not done a substantive job. The other thing that you want to think about is the discipline in regards to the funding priorities of Uganda. Right now, when we're going into the elections of 2021, the Parliament of Uganda went into political gerrymandering, where it began creating new constituencies and new districts, among others. Because of that, we had 584 town councils which were created in Uganda. Of those, according to the statistics by the Ministry of Finance, Planning and Economic Development, and backed up by the report of the Auditor General of 2020, only 286 are directly funded. What that means is that the common Ugandan cannot be able to access the resources and the priorities of government. And all that goes into our structural priorities. So you have political gerrymandering that speaks to political accountability. Right now, we are having a situation whereby a son of the head of state is throwing around lavish parties, saying people are wishing him happy birthday. But the same Ugandans who he claims to be wishing him happy birthday are the ones who are actually suffering majorly. So the fiscal discipline. Yes. Finally, I'll end with this. We have to rethink our foreign policy and what this speaks to us as a nation. So when you read the national objectives and directive principles of state policy, which is a key feature of the Ugandan constitution, it says that the Ugandan foreign policy must respect international laws and regulations. One of those is the African Charter that brings together African states. Under the African Union Charter, you have something called the African Peer Review Mechanism. That mechanism is designed to ensure that African states are able to observe and talk to one another about how to take their nations forward and also cause accountability. Now, in Uganda, what we're having right now is the disrespect of the African Peer Review Mechanism because of the lack of political accountability. So the systems have been tested and have been formed.
All right, Simon.
So the question,
Simon, foreign policy, political accountability, these are all the things that we should bring to the front burner. Thank you so much, Simon, for sharing so much views on the issues in Uganda, and also Marcella.
Thank you, Marcella, for your insight and time. We do appreciate having you both join us on today's conversation.
Thank you.
Okay, this is where we draw the curtains on today's edition of the conversation. In the first half of the program, we did look at the postponement of this primaries, presidential primaries by the major political parties in Nigeria, the APC and the PDP. And in part two of the show, we just concluded our conversation on the soaring prices of commodities in Uganda, where the president said, there's nothing we can do about it. We just have to follow the free market economy. I'm Gbenga Aborowa. See you next time on The Conversation.
And I am Rita Omodia. Till Wednesday. Bye-bye.